Okay, so welcome to our first in-depth analysis of a poem, and we're going to start off with one of Keats's earliest poems, and I think one of his most accessible poems, particularly for students who are sitting there leaving cert. To one who has been long in city pent. Now, pent here in the title is an important word because it signifies trapped or kept locked down, and so I'm going to be nominating this as our official poem of the 2020 COVID-19 lockdown. Normally I suggest that this is highly applicable to students studying their leaving cert because this is exactly what Keats was doing when he was writing this poem. He was studying for his licentiate exams as an apothecary, effectively, pre-med exams as we might see them now. And so you have a common experience that is being shared with Keats, and we're going to return to that idea later on when we see how we might build that into one of our responses. So let's start off by reading the poem very, very quickly. To one who has been long in city pent, 'tis very sweet to look into the fair and open face of heaven, to breathe a prayer full in the smile of the blue firmament. Who is more happy when, with heart's content fatigued, he sinks into some pleasant glare of wavy grass, and reads a debonair and gentle tale of love and languishment? Returning home at evening with an ear catching the notes of Philomel, and eye watching the sailing cloudlet's bright career, he mourns that day so soon has glided by, e'en like the passage of an angel's tear that falls through the clear ether silently. So the first thing to say about this poem is it's an example of one of many of the sonnets that Keats writes, a form he returns to time and time again. And you will see this is what's called an Italian or Petrarchan sonnet, and that's characterized by a rhyming scheme A, B, B, A, B, B, A, and we see A there marked with the red words and B the blue, and this creates a kind of constant pattern. Now that's the first 8 lines of the poem, and that we call the octave. And then what's introduced here is called the turn or the volta, and this is one of the crucial parts of a sonnet, that basically in the first 8 lines he's dealing with a concept, then there's a shift of gear after 8 lines, and the last 6 lines, the sestet as we're going to be calling it, kind of resolves or gives a personal perspective on that. So in the first 8 lines here, what we have is thinking about going out and lying in nature after having been pent up or locked up within the city, and then it's the journey home from that experience that he shares with the reader. And our rhyming scheme here is CD, CD, CD. Now, depending on the different types of rhyming schemes in a sonnet, we can classify them as different types of sonnets, but they all follow that same octave, volta, turn, and then sestet at the end kind of structure. And this is important because that's how he is dealing with this one solid concept. So what are the stylistic features that you want to be looking out for here? So in many ways we have to think of this poem as a kind of a poet early in his career trying to get to grips with writing this type of poem. It's like a writing exercise in many ways. You will, in your answers to the exam, you will be writing about sonnets, and you could conceivably write an answer just on the sonnets, but I'd always be suggesting to students to balance your responses between the sonnets and the odes if at all possible, to show you can handle the 2 different forms. One of the things that you should be doing is looking at the structure of the poem and saying, well, what type of language, what type of stylistic techniques are being used? And one we might think of here is to look at the words which are kind of common and everyday words, and others that are elevated or heightened use of language. So we might look to words like firmament, languishment, philomel, and ether. These are words that have a heightened meaning, and I suppose change the tone of the poem somewhat, that it's not just an everyday event. He's not looking up at the sky, he's looking up at the firmament, and that gives a kind of a more magical or maybe sacrosanct quality to what's being said. A second feature to look at here is the idea of the rhetorical question, and the rhetorical question really runs from line 5 to line 8. It's a kind of a 4-line quatrain that is specifically designed to draw the reader in. Now, as with all lyric poetry, when lyric here we have to be very careful. It doesn't mean a song, as many people presume it means because they associate lyrics with songs. With lyric poetry, it's a type of poem that's trying to express a deep emotion. And what better way to engage a reader with that kind of deep emotion than to ask a question of them, to draw a connection and a parallel between common experiences that you might have had. So here we see this quatrain. He asks about who is more happy when, with heart's content, fatigued, he sinks into some pleasant lair of wavy grass. So basically he's retreated to the countryside. He's lying down in the long grass. And what does he do when he gets there? This is the important thing. He gets there and he starts to read. And this association of art and nature is a theme that's going to come back over and over again within the poems. But not just that, he reads a gentle tale of love and languishment. He's not bringing his study books out with him. He's not reading a gentle tale of dissection and anatomy. He's reading of love and languishment. So it's a total escape. So he's escaping physically and he's escaping intellectually from that pent-up city. The third thing that we might comment upon in our exam essays is to say that this is a poem of contrasts. Now, ostensibly, we have two sets of contrast here. We have the poet pitting the city against nature, and we also have the scientific medical studies being pitted against this tale of love that we talked about in the previous slide. Now, this is important because the structure of the poem is quite imbalanced if we think of it. It's not two equal sides. What discussion of the city do we get after all? We only really have two references to it. The city pent in the opening line, and in line 9, returning home at evening. That's a brief, tentative reference to returning to the city. But really we see that the word pent is doing an awful lot of work, that we are kind of superimposing our own impressions of what the city must be like based on those very, very small words that do a lot of work, as I said. And we get, relatively little discussion of the realities of the countryside either. We have references maybe to the wavy grass, and we have the notes of the blackbird, the nightingale rather, the philomel, and we have the cloudlet's bright career. But really, we are superimposing our own understanding of these ideas onto the situation. References to ether and the angel's tear conclude the poem, I think, as I say in the notes there, in a transcendent manner. Ether, of course, is the word that would have been used to describe, the air all around us before they knew of the kind of the breakdown of the composition of what air is made of, your nitrogen and your oxygen and carbon dioxide and whatever. And so those things have a kind of a medical connotation as well, of being put to sleep under an ether, which is a strong movement. And of course this becomes the balance between the city and the countryside becomes quite stark. And we could go back to that whole phrase, tempus fugit, time flies, because there's a deep sense of regret in the idea that he has to return to the city. Where is this regret expressed? He mourns that day so soon has glided by. Who amongst us hasn't had that sensation at one time or another, when time flies by when you're having fun, as the old saying goes? So to conclude very quickly, what are the things we want to be mentioning in our exam? We return to the idea that this is the work of a young poet finding his feet both in terms of his craft and his themes. He's getting to know how to write sonnets, and he's picking out themes which specifically highlight these romantic ideas. The experience that he's describing is universal, particularly so to students who are preparing for the Leaving Cert. And we can say that even though we're 200 years separated from the writing of the poem, the emotion that is conveyed to us, those regrets, those pent-up frustrations, those moments of glad release, they are all the more tangible to us as students because we can identify with Keats here. He also establishes a firm bond with the reader, and he shares his perspective with us. And then finally, the imagery of the octet and the nightingale's song and the clouds careering across the sky is, it's beautiful in a literal sense. We can really imagine undertaking that same act. It causes us to share in his delight, and also I think to share in his regret, because we know what it's like to have to leave those pleasant moments behind. So as I say at the end there, even as he acknowledges the grim reality that he must return to the city for his studies, so you too must return to your books. And you well, my main advice would be to choose 2 or 3 quotations from this poem that you can use to illustrate the romantic qualities, the accessibility of the theme that he's talking about, but also some of the heightened stylistic and linguistic choices that the poet makes in order to heighten the experience, so that he's looking back on something that is more emotionally charged than it might be if it was just discussed in very plain, unornamented language.